Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another episode review from the classic Are You Afraid of the Dark television series. This episode came from Season 3, it was written by Chloe Brown, and was directed by DJ MacHale himself, the co-creator of Are You Afraid of the Dark. And the episode in question is The Tale of the Guardian's Curse. Now, this is like the second time I've seen this episode in my life. I've mentioned this in the past, but years ago, way before Paramount Plus and way before YouTube started cracking down on copyright, there was a channel that had a good amount of the Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes on there, and I caught them all in a binge, a lot of the ones I never caught as a kid. And this was one of them, and I remember being very creeped out by it. But recently, a good friend of mine, Spongy444, mentioned in this chat that I'm in on Discord that this one felt a lot like a Disney Channel original movie, which will play into a collab video that I'm doing with a fellow YouTuber, and I'm going to keep that a surprise, so stay tuned for that in the near future. So I was like, yeah, I got to check this one out again, because I really wanted to see it. Also, we were going to do it on Goose Junkies episode 16, but we're going to have to postpone that episode for a few months as well. I was interested in seeing it. And after seeing it again, after such a long time, I have to agree with my friend Spongy here. This, in a lot of ways, feels like those late golden age of kids horror Disney Channel original movies. This easily could have been made into one, the concept at least. If you've ever seen the movie Under Wraps, this has a lot of that in the veins of it. It's almost a bit too close, but this feels like it could have been an alternate cut of that. Even down to how the characters operate, how the villain feels like a typical Disney Channel villain, and all the tropes involved in like Disney Channel movies. This feels so much like that. But to give it credit, a lot of the time when I say that, I use it as a negative. But here, it's kind of a positive. And we'll get into that in a bit. So off the bat, if you have not seen The Tale of the Guardian's Curse, this is actually probably one of the better made episodes of the whole show in terms of just quality. So yeah, I would say this is a must try. You might like it more than I did. You actually might like it less, but I haven't seen much abject hate for this episode ever. So yeah, give this one a whirl. You might like it, especially if you're a fan of the Mummy subgenre. Even though this is kind of derivative of that, I still think you will enjoy it. So let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So, like all other Are You Afraid of the Dark episodes, the story starts off with the Midnight Society, and whoever's turn it is to say the story gets to throw the milk creamer, or whatever it is, into the fire to start the tale. And the story starts off in kind of like a prologue way, where they're doing construction in this museum, down, I guess, in the basement level of it. The building is very old, and they're doing some repairs, and some contractors find this wall, and they're starting to break down this wall, I guess, to expand something, and they look inside of it, very reminiscent to a very famous scene that's known in history, where Lord Carnarvon and the other guy who discovered King Tut's tomb, they broke open the wall and they say marvelous things, you know. It's a callback to that. And when these workers look in there, they see a sealed sarcophagus of a very ancient Egyptian being. And the discovery is insane because they can't believe it, and they attribute it that this probably could have been stolen in the past, as we learn later on when this character named Dr. Dugan comes in. And Dr. Dugan, I think, is played by a man named Martin Doyle. I think that's his name. If you don't know who Martin Doyle is, I think he was the dad, I think, in Night of the Living Dummy 3 and Goosebumps. So if you're a fan of that episode, I think you'll like this here. So Dr. Dugan gets called, but unfortunately he has to come to this museum in like a specialist way on call, and he has to postpone this ski vacation that he has planned with his two kids, Cleo and Josh, who are like older, you know, maybe like 14 or 15 years old, and they're going to be the main protagonists of the story. So when Dr. Dugan gets called, This man who runs the museum named Dr. Capel Smith, he's a very memorable name. It's very specific. But he is excited for this discovery and wants to know Dr. Dugan's input. And Dr. Dugan gets immediately into looking into this information here. And then we get the narration from the person telling the story, gives some backstory of Cleo and Josh, and some history behind, you know, them losing their mother at a young age, and they've been raised by their father majority of their life, and how the father's constantly putting off vacations to do this. And we see Cleo and Josh, you know, they're back, I guess, at home, their home, or I guess a temporary living situation, or an apartment or something. And they're discussing about how many times their father has flaked on vacations because of his career. And Cleo seems to be in defense of it, but Josh seems to be really upset about it. But we learned that Dr. Dugan has found some information about it, and this is where it comes in, where it was stolen back in the 1920s before the building became a museum, and somebody had stashed the sarcophagus there. And studying the inscriptions with Dr. Capel Smith there, they realize that it's tied to this being called Mina, who is an ancient Egyptian deity who had blood sacrifices done to her. And, you know, this is after they open up the sarcophagus and they look in the inscriptions. They realize that she is tied to this elixir of life legend and this ring of eternity. And Dr. Capel Smith said that he knows a lot about the ring of eternity legend and think that is really cool. Now, I guess the goal is to try to find it, because if this is actually this being Mina, it is said on the inscriptions through a guardian's curse that whoever tries to, you know, mess with this will meet a grisly fate. And, you know, they're like, well, if we can find this, maybe we can avoid the guardian's curse. They kind of look at it in like a superstitious way. But Dr. Capel Smith also seems to know that this ring of eternity was said to turn people into stone back in the day, and that may or may not play a factor into the climax, as we'll see. But anyway, Josh and Cleo, after, you know, doing this with their father and Dr. Capel Smith, they are just hanging out in the mummy room, just kind of hanging around, shooting the crap. And Josh, in an angry fit, kind of like kicks the sarcophagus, and it opens up a secret hatch, and they find the actual elixir of life and the ring of eternity. And when they pick up the elixir, they drop it onto the mummy's body. And mind you, the mummy here, the effect looks incredible. It looks absolutely terrifying, nightmare fuel almost. The elixir spills on it. They realize they messed up, and they want to get out of there before anybody notices anything. And when they do, we see a shot of the mummy's hand raised up, so now we know that the mummy's alive. So Josh and Cleo head back home, and they notice that their house or apartment has been ransacked, and they can't seem to find their father anywhere. So they're like, okay, well, I guess we're going to have to hold on to this discovery, because, you know, in their minds, the faster they get this discovery over with, the faster they get to go back on their vacation and all that. So they head back to the museum again, because they don't know where their father is, or Dr. Capel Smith for that matter. And what happens is when they go back, they realize that the mummy is gone, and they might be followed by this mummy in the museum. And they panic a little bit, and they go down to this storage area of the museum to kind of escape the mummy, or what they think is the mummy. And they have a jump scare involving a typical looking sealed mummy with like its wrappings and all that. But stumbling after they hear some noises, they discover that their father is passed out on one of the crates in the back. And there's a weird smell down there, and all the doors are locked, and they're like, what's going on here? The mummy must have locked us in here. It wants this stuff back. And it turns out, big old plot twist, Dr. Capel Smith, in like a Disney Channel original movie fashion, reveals that he's kind of the bad guy. He's laced all these crates down below with kerosene. He has a torch with him, and all he has to do is light the torch, and the whole place goes up in fire. There's like a flashback where it reveals that he was the one that ransacked the house. He actually had a chloroform napkin and put it Dr. Dugan's mouth to make him pass out to bring him here. And he gives the kids an ultimatum to give him the Ring of Eternity, even though at this point he only knows about the Ring of Eternity and not necessarily the Elixir of Life. I should have probably made that more clear. But anyway, Josh has the ring and he decides to give it over. And then Cable Smith decides to double cross him anyway, but Cleo's able to convince him, well, hey, before you light us on fire, can you at least show us how it works? And he's like, well, sure, why not? And there's this whole effect where he turns blue and there's like this blue light where he's wearing the Ring of Eternity. And he's like, well, now I'm immortal and all that. But there's a plot twist and some payoff to something that we learned early on in the episode. And something happens to Dr. Cable Smith in a very eerie fashion, I guess. The effects could have been a bit better, though. But after that, they realize that the mummy still needs to be taken care of, let's just say. And it ends in a very weird way, where there's something mentioned earlier that Josh believes that their dad needs a girlfriend, or they might need a stepmom. And let's just leave it at that. Let's just leave it at that. You can kind of piece together the ending. And that essentially is what you're going to expect out of the story, minus the fact that the Midnight Society closes out the episode like usual as well, for the Tale of the Guardian's Curse. So this one was actually surprising to me this go around. I didn't quite love it or remember my love of it in like a fond way while rewatching this. It didn't really click on anything here, but the first thing I can really commend on this episode is the production value. The museum set pieces, the mummy effects, the way that this storage facility under the museum looks, the basement in the beginning of the episode, the apartment even, like Dugan's study. The set pieces are fantastic in this episode. I think this has to be one of the best set pieces that the Are You Afraid of the Dark show ever made. It's up there with like the catacombs from Vampire Town. It's up there with the carnival from Laughing in the Dark. I mean, there's a lot of cool set pieces, but this is definitely one of them. The acting performances here for Cleo and Josh were pretty standard and actually quite good for Dark standards. Nothing too special here, nothing too emotional, but they're serviceable and entertaining enough. They had a lot of electric moments. It's always nice to see Martin Doyle, who always does a fantastic job, play a role and play a father figure in these kids' horror episodes from the 90s. And Dr. Dugan was a cool character. And I like the family dynamics of these kids growing up pretty much with a single dad who's obsessed with his work and not that great of a parent or paying attention to them. And that is a common trope you see in the 90s, unfortunately. Workaholic dads put aside their kids. It is a typical thing, and yeah, it is kind of overdone, to be honest. But here, it's kind of played in a fun way, where the kids get to, you know, realize this and try to help their dad, as opposed to the typical way it's done, where the dad has to go through, oh, I'm a crappy father. He does kind of realize that, but it's done in a more approachable way, I would say, and I like that. Dr. Cable Smith, for him being like a Frank Langella in that DCOM Now You See It type of villain, he was kind of cool. I kind of like his motives. He had some sinisterness to him. He's willing to kill this family. He's willing to, you know, ransack a home. He has chloroform napkins that can knock people out. Like, this guy comes prepared. I mean, he's kind of threatening. So, yeah, it's nice to see a legitimately threatening dark villain every once in a while. That's not something supernatural or a monster. So, yeah, that was cool. I've already mentioned the look of the mummy looks great, but the scenes where the mummy is included are done so eerily that the tension until that recontextualization is wound pretty tight, and I have to give it to it. And the concept of this one is like a love letter to, like I said, the history of finding King Tut's coffin. So yeah, a lot of positives I have with this, even though we have some negatives with it. In terms of mummy stories, especially in kids' horror, this is very derivative of a lot of them. It's pretty basic. It's kind of like, what is it, Night of the Mummy from Haunting Hour. It's kind of like Don't Wake Mummy from Goosebumps, the short story or the episode. It has a lot of that Curse of the Mummy's Tomb, Return of the Mummy, all the other Mummy Goosebumps books in its veins here. There's nothing that really separates this, minus the DCOM tone to it. Like I said early on, it feels a lot like that Under Wraps movie from 1997, or even its remake for that matter. There's a lot of similarities there, especially in the tone and the delivery of everything. And so, yeah, like, that is a negative. It's just kind of derivative. Nothing really stands out about it. I will say this. I will say this. There are some weird moments here, especially in the ending with how the whole mummy thing is handled. To me, really drops the ball, in my opinion. I don't necessarily hate the ending, but it puts it into such a cornball, cheesy way to close out the story that it kind of rubs me the wrong way. I kind of wish it was a little bit darker, because there was mentions of like blood sacrifice for this Mina woman when she was alive thousands of years ago. And the ending is just so, like I said, it's just so weird. I don't want to spoil it, but it's just, why? It's so bizarre. I have no words. And I guess we're going to get down to Dr. Caplesmith. The delivery here, I feel like in the case of Dr. Caplesmith and him understanding the full story, he's in and out, you know, perfectly enough to have a recontextualization moment happen for him, which I think is a positive in terms of the reveal of the story. But there's some parts of it where he just so happened to know this information or whatnot that, like, you know, if you're so knowledgeable of this stuff and you need to call an expert in and you know about this, then why did you have to question it when you found the sarcophagus? Why couldn't you just open it, right? It just, there's some parts of it why the Dugan family had to come into it that just doesn't really make much sense to me. And I guess they called him in because he's a specialist and he can, like, open this stuff carefully or whatnot. But still, like, why? And I guess some other negatives I have are, like, the tropes. There are some tropes in here involving siblings and stuff. If you've ever dealt with, you know, a lot of kids media where kids or a group of siblings grow up with a single dad, all this stuff is here. Where they're trying to set them up with a girlfriend and all that. It's there. But it's definitely an undertone to the story, so it's not that big, but it is a mild nitpick I'm going to play on, because I just, like I said, I've seen this stuff so many times, and the story is just so derivative. It doesn't really bring anything new with it, so it feels like it's just there to be in the norm and not be different. And some people might say, hey, playing it safe is cool. You're not really biting off too much than you can chew. That's fair, and I can see why you might like it more for that. But, yeah, this doesn't do really anything new here. Overall, though, those negatives are kind of medium, though. And I would say for enjoyment factor here, this DCOM cheese overlay to it does kind of get in the way a little bit. It does feel a little too hunky-dory. There's not enough pizzazz that I want out of a dark episode. But hey, it was serviceable and it was quite good. So from a 0 to 5 star basis, I decided to be a little more fair on this. I thought this was flat average for kids horror, but flat average for me is good. And that's like C tier stuff. This is definitely a C tier episode. It doesn't get too much wrong, but it gets a lot right. So I'm willing to give this thing between a 3.5 to a 3.9. And where I settled was right in the middle. I gave this a 3.7 out of 5 stars. Very exceptional. Could have been a little bit better, less generic, less formulaic, a little more standout. Doesn't have a lot of similar problems that some other C-tier episodes have. It's kind of put here just from lack of ingenuity for the most of it. But still a serviceable, solid episode, and I highly recommend you go check this out if you haven't seen it before. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the Tale of the Guardian's Curse. Let me know down in the comment section if you've seen this episode before. Do you love this or do you hate this? I'm dying to know, and I'll see you next time.